Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
Welcome to Monday Night Monsters on the Scary Stories NYC channel. I'm your old pal Bigfoot. Tonight we've got two brand new scary stories that I think fit the title of Monday Night Monsters very well. Let's jump right into the first one, which we either call Dogman at the Window, or else the Dogman is not the Tooth Fairy. Dear Scary Stories NYC, this happened to me when I was very little, maybe 7. So some of it comes from my memory, and parts of it come from my mother talking about it over the years since then. I'm not really sure for the most part where fact blurs into fiction, but the image of the Dogman outside my bedroom window is one that will remain in my head for the rest of my life. That part nobody had to tell me about, because that part is something I can never forget. So, when you're a kid and you lose a tooth, you're supposed to put it under your pillow, and then you get a quarter from the Tooth Fairy. Or maybe you get $1, or 5, or 10. I guess it all depends on how rich your parents are. When I was a kid, we got a quarter. So, this one time I lost a tooth, and I was very excited because I had been planning for some time to stay up late and finally, on behalf of kids everywhere, look the Tooth Fairy right in the face and know who he or she really was. My mom had given me a little plastic container thing shaped like a tooth, but bigger. I was to put the tooth in there and snap it shut, then place it under my pillow. I asked her why I had to do this, and she said it was so that the Tooth Fairy didn't have to get their hands messy touching my tooth. That didn't make sense to me, though, and I'll tell you why. The quarter would be inside that plastic tooth in place of my original tooth in the morning. So that meant someone had to open the plastic tooth, take my real tooth out, and put the quarter in. Therefore, someone was getting their hands dirty in either case. Nevertheless, I followed the accepted ritual and put my tooth in the white plastic container, then placed the container under my pillow, and I was then ready to pretend to be asleep and wait for the moment I had been waiting since my last lost tooth to try, the moment all kids around the world would thank me for, the moment when I would out the Tooth Fairy herself, or himself, I wasn't sure which. I have a brother we can call Roger. He's 2 years younger than me, and we shared the same ground floor bedroom at the time. He was the only one I told my plan to, since I felt I could trust him. I didn't tell my classmates or other friends in case I fell asleep and failed in my mission. I didn't want to get their hopes up, then let them crash, and I didn't want to get made fun of for it either. I viewed myself as a brave warrior going into battle, ready to smear myself across the face of time and strike a blow for kids against the myths used to hold us down and keep us in ignorance for so long. If I succeeded in this, I told Roger, the sky was the limit. Next up, the Easter Bunny. Then, who knows, maybe even Santa himself. Roger was awed by my bravery and vision and wished me luck solemnly. He told me he'd wake me up if I fell asleep, but he was snoring inside of 10 minutes. that was okay. He was just a little kid, not a brave warrior against the supernatural like I was. I fell asleep at one point and had a strange dream. I was at a train station, looking around at everyone. I wasn't looking for my mother. I was looking for the Tooth Fairy. I asked several people if they were the Tooth Fairy. They either said no or turned away from me, annoyed. One old lady asked me what the Tooth Fairy looked like. I told her I didn't really know. She asked me how I could ever find a person that I didn't know the appearance of. That woke me up, and I realized I had been asleep. I panicked and looked under the pillow. The plastic tooth was there. I snatched it and opened it, looking inside. My original tooth was still there, not the quarter. That meant the Tooth Fairy had not come yet. I breathed a sigh of relief, then laid back down again. I needed some way of making sure I wouldn't fall back asleep. I decided to pull the blanket up and keep my feet cold. It was something that made me uncomfortable, and still does. I can't sleep with cold feet. So I laid there, uncomfortable, and wondered what time the Tooth Fairy was finally going to show up. I nearly fell asleep again, and then I heard a scratching and tapping sound. Sitting up, I looked to the window and saw someone there. Well, I saw something there. Could that be the Tooth Fairy? It certainly didn't look like the Tooth Fairy, or what I thought the Tooth Fairy would look like. I always assumed that they would be at least humanoid. This was someone standing up like a person, standing outside my window. But they had hair all over their body, or, well, at least all over their chest. Their arms and hands were hairy too, and they had a dog face. I laughed when I saw them, and they curled their lip back, showing me very long, sharp-looking teeth. I interpreted this as the dog person smiling at me. I got up out of bed and walked toward the window. The hairy dog person seemed to be happy by this, and their toothy smile grew broader. It reminded me of that thing from Little Red Riding Hood where she goes, "My, but what large teeth you have, Grandma." In that story, the dog person ended up being the bad guy. I wondered if this was the same kind of thing going on here. Was this the Tooth Fairy? Or was this the big bad wolf? Or could they be the same thing? It would be just like grown-ups to not let us know. Or what if the Tooth Fairy was sick and the big bad wolf was just working as a substitute? I tried to speak quietly so I didn't wake Mom or my brother, but I asked the dog person if he or she was the Tooth Fairy. They didn't seem to hear me, so I went very close to the window. This seemed to make the hairy Tooth Fairy make a sound that reminded me of my cat purring, but this was different. It was a very low sound, and when it smiled to show me its teeth this time, I could see that it was drooling. Well, it would make sense that the Tooth Fairy would have very large teeth if you think about it. It didn't make much sense that it would be a dog that stood up like a person, but who was I to say? I was just a kid. So, then something happened that caused me to get so frightened that I screamed at the top of my lungs. And what happened was, my brother Roger had awakened, seen that Dogman outside the window, and begun screaming. Now he was screaming because of the Dogman, and I was screaming because of him. My mother came running into the room to see what was wrong with us, and she saw the thing outside the window too. Now, the three of us were all screaming at the top of our lungs, and that Dogman ran away. I went to the window quickly and started opening it. I wanted to call the tooth fairy back. I was crying. I didn't want him or her to leave. I still hadn't gotten my quarter. My mother claims it took all her strength to tear me off that window, and that once she had, I broke free of her and ran back to start trying to open it all over again. She claimed this went on for some time, with Roger screaming and crying the whole way. I don't remember the rest, and Roger doesn't remember any of this night, but according to my mother, she had to give both of us another bath after our ordeal, and she dressed us in our backup pajamas when she was done. We both got to stay in her room that night, and in the morning, there was a quarter in my plastic tooth. I asked my mother if she had seen the tooth fairy, and she laughed at me. I told her that the way my pillow was, it was partially under hers. When the tooth fairy came, he or she would have to have lifted both pillows to get to my plastic tooth container. I begged her to think as hard as she could and try to remember if she saw anything weird during the night. I tried to question her like I had seen detectives question witnesses on TV. She was a tough cookie, though, and she didn't break. I never did find any direct evidence of what the tooth fairy looked like, but I will tell you the one fact I did learn about this subject. The tooth fairy is most definitely not the Dogman. We'll be back with another all-new monster story right after this.
Hey, Biggity Foot. What are you doing for July 4th, yo?
I don't know, Debbie, but I do know what I'm doing the weekend after.
OMG! What's that, yo?
I'm gonna go to the Collectibles extravaganza up in Boxborough, Massachusetts, right next to Wolf Swamp, where Henry Lee Dogman lives.
Badass, yo!
I know, right?
Are you gonna, sell your stuff?
I'm gonna buy other people's old stuff and turn it into my new stuff.
Good, cause your nest could sure use some, redecorating, yo.
Come to the Collectibles extravaganza, hosted by the king of pop culture himself, TV's famous Gary Summers, who appeared as an expert on pop culture on the PBS Antiques Roadshow. It's the weekend of July 6th and 7th, 2019, at the air-conditioned Regency Hotel, where Route 111 meets Route 495 in Boxborough, Massachusetts, home of the Wolf People. See you there. Caveman, on my property. Dear Scary Stories, this happened when I bought my first home back over 20 years ago, almost 21 years. My wife and I had gone into debt to get this place, and we still live there to this day. But if we had had enough money to move, we would have, after I saw what I can only describe as a caveman on my property. Here's the way it happened. My wife and I had purchased a full acre of land with a small, one-bedroom house on it. We hoped to be able to add onto the house over time, assuming we gathered a bit of wealth around us. We wanted a family, but couldn't afford it yet. Much of the land was covered in bushes and tall grass and was fairly impenetrable. My wife's brother and I would spend Saturdays clearing the land with a chainsaw, bit by tiny bit by tiny bit. One Saturday, we found a hole in the ground that I almost fell into. After clearing the vegetation away, we saw that it was actually a natural well-type shape, but it had no water in it. We decided that the next week we would get ropes and flashlights and try to go down the hole and see what there was to see of it. We covered it up, with a large, flat stone that it took both of us to drag over, and we went inside to crack some cold ones and talk about the next weekend's adventure with my wife. She, of course, was in favor of sealing it up and never finding out anything about what was inside. She was convinced we would either get stuck or hurt ourselves or something along those lines, so she was very unhappy with our excitement and curiosity. She didn't have to worry, though, because we never got to go down the hole, and here's why we didn't. Something else came out of it. Okay, there was a strange sound from the field in the middle of the night, loud enough that we both heard it over the TV we were watching. It immediately set off our dog barking, a very high-pitched, nervous, repetitive bark. The dog was warning us about something and trying to scare something off at the same time, but he was too scared to scare anyone. I ran to the back door to look outside, and as soon as I opened it, that dog ran inside and downstairs to hide. I was still wondering what I had heard, and seeing how scared the dog was didn't make me feel any better about things. I grabbed a crappy flashlight we had at the time and went out back. I had been meaning to buy a good new flash for the upcoming exploration of that hole, but I hadn't gotten around to it yet. This flashlight cast a fairly dim light, and sometimes would turn off, so you'd have to hold it a certain way and tap it to get it back on. I wandered out into the yard, heading in the direction of the hole. When I got there, though, I was confused. The rock we had placed on the hole seemed to somehow be upside down. I stared and stared at it, trying to understand what I was seeing. Then I noticed something truly amazing. The rock wasn't over the hole. The hole was next to the rock. So in other words, it looked as though someone or something had blown the rock off the hole and tipped it over to its other side, leaving it lying next to the hole. What could have caused that to happen? Maybe covering the hole caused pressure to build up and that tipped it over. Maybe the hole was part of some sort of natural spring or geyser or even a volcano. Then something pinged off my head from my right side. I turned my flashlight to the direction and it turned off. After tapping it a few times, I saw what I swear looked like a man standing there barefoot. I moved the light up and got a pebble pinged off my forehead from that man. When I got the flashlight up to his face, I was so surprised that I accidentally dropped the flashlight. I'll tell you what I saw, though. Okay, this was a man, like I said, but it was a very hairy man. It had dark, curly hair on its chest, and it had a very pale body, almost grayish white, like an albino sort of, but not exactly. Its face was not a human face, though. What I saw was a kind of monkey face, but with a beard. Monkeys don't have beards, but this one did. Its nose was a monkey nose, and it had a heavy brow ridge over its eyes, just like a monkey, but its long, dark hair was straight and down past its shoulders. It seemed as though he had cut it out of his eyes in the front to some degree, in a primitive way, so that gave it the effect of a mullet, you might say. It was not cut with scissors, though. It seemed to have been sliced out of his eyes using some sort of a rough blade, and I don't think a mirror was used in the process either. The eyes of the thing looked very human and also very inhuman at the same time. It definitely had a kind of intelligence, but this man was also an animal. It wore a loincloth that seemed to be made from torn animal skin, so it had to be at least partially human. A lot of the details I just described are from my memory, because I only looked at this guy for a second or two before I dropped that flashlight. For a split second, I considered bending down and picking it up, but that man let out a sort of a grunting sound, and I ran straight back to the house. When I got inside, I slammed the door and double-bolted it. My wife asked me what was wrong. I just remember saying, "Don't go out there," and running downstairs to hide next to the dog. So that very next day, I took off work and got as much cement mix as I could afford. My wife and I mixed it together, then dropped some big rocks and small boulders down the hole. Finally, we poured the cement down the hole to fill it up. We still had a 4 or 5 foot hole there, but the bottom was now filled. On Saturday, her brother and I finished the job. For the rest of the time clearing the land, we paid special attention to try to find any other entrances to the place that the hairy man had apparently come from, but we never found another entrance. I'm sure there are other ways into and out of that cavern system, but I was just happy that none of them seemed to be on our land. Several people over the years have told me that I saw Bigfoot, but if so, he must have had the mange, because he was not covered in fur except in the places a man would have hair, chest, legs, back of arms, that sort of thing. Also, Bigfoot doesn't wear a loincloth in the stories I've heard. No, what I saw seemed to be some sort of primitive man, like what you might call a caveman. It was not a giant. It was maybe the same size as I was, but it looked much stronger than me. I am certain it could have easily defeated me in a fight, and I'm glad I got away. I'm also glad that it never came back. That was the one and only time any of us ever saw that thing, and so that's all I can really tell you about the caveman on my property. And now, get ready for an all-new, completely uncensored, slightly bloody, and absolutely terrifying new Dogman story. Oh, wait. YouTube won't allow me to tell you stories like that on this channel. If you want to hear that, you're going to have to go to peterbernard.com and sign up for our paid subscribers club. You can choose any price you can afford for a 1-month subscription, and then every weekend, we tell you a story YouTube would never allow us to tell you on this channel. See you this Sunday for an all-new, very scary, completely uncensored Dogman story.
If you enjoyed this, please click like or consider subscribing. Remember to click the bell icon or you won't get notifications. If you want to listen to Bigfoot's secret uncensored story each Sunday, just go to peterbernard.com and become a paid subscriber. See you tomorrow. Same dog time, same dog channel.
Come back for more scary stories.